This is the most dangerous leaf in the world. Just one sip of tea brewed with it, and you could evolve into a powerful mutant. The face of a predator, the limbs of a dinosaur. Isn't that even cooler than Spider-Man? Archaeologist Johnny was on a research trip in South America. During that time, he was warmly welcomed by a primitive tribe. However, after drinking a cup of water steeped with the leaf, he started sweating all over and felt unwell. The leaf is an ancient organism. Johnny recognized its research value, so earlier on, he sent a box of it to his workplace, the Chicago Museum, realizing the leaf might be dangerous. Johnny rushed to the cargo ship trying to stop its distribution, but he discovered the leaves weren't on the ship at all. The ship sailed for over 40 days to reach Port Chicago Police DP. Strangely enough, there was no one aboard. No one knew what had happened there, but the bloodstains everywhere made it clear something horrific must have gone down on that ship. The chief inspector was assigned to investigate. Could the crew have been murdered and dumped into the ocean? However, things weren't that simple. When they opened the water tank, a disgusting stench of rotting corpses rushed out. To their horror, the missing crew were all in there. Their heads violently ripped off. None of the bodies were intact. What kind of monster did this? The brutality was beyond belief. 1 week after the cargo ship was found, the Chicago Museum received the crate Johnny had sent. According to the elderly professor in a wheelchair, the crate was supposed to be on the ship, but due to some unknown issue, it ended up being airshipped instead. Inside was a statue named Kothoga. It resembled a lizard. In South American tribes, there's a local legend. Kothoga is said to be the child of a demon, possessing immense power. Margot scoffed at the idea, thinking it was pure superstition, but the museum director didn't mind the rumor, because the more superstition, the more revenue it brought to the museum. Aside from the statue, biologist Margot also found inside the crate leaves infested with some kind of fungus with red insect eggs attached to them. Worried the eggs might secrete toxins, Margot picked out some leaves and stored them in a freezer for study. The rest, along with the crate, she burned entirely. Margot thought she had removed all potential threats, but that very night, someone died. A security guard in the restroom was dragged away by an unknown creature. By the time he was found the next day, his body was decapitated and mangled. Meanwhile, Johnny's office was completely trashed. The coroner told the chief, before the guard died, his head suffered a massive blow, a 5-centimeter wide hole in the skull, with the brain matter completely gone. It was as if something had drained it completely. They weighed the brain and found it surprisingly light. Further examination revealed the thalamus and pituitary gland were missing. These organs regulate hormone secretion, as well as control body temperature, blood pressure, and heartbeat. They're critical to life. The chief's instinct told him the security guard and the crew were likely killed by the same perpetrator. He called to ask for the crew's autopsy report. Sure enough, just like the guard, their thalamus and pituitary glands were also missing. The museum was about to host an ancient artifact exhibition, along with a grand reception. The director hoped the chief could solve the case quickly to avoid any unforeseen trouble. After the incident, the police immediately increased patrols around the museum. That night, 2 officers in the underground corridor found a trail of strange footprints with traces of blood, but they found nothing else that night. Little did they know, lurking in the unseen shadows was a massive and dangerous beast, ready to strike. However, the police did not give up. A few days later, they searched the underground tunnel again and finally made a discovery. Seeing a suspicious figure in the shadows, the police opened fire without hesitation. The man they shot dead was a suspected murderer and a twice-escaped rapist out on bail. On his body, the police not only found the guard's wallet, but also a crew member's ID tag. Although the chief believed this evidence was insufficient to prove the rapist was the real killer, the museum insisted on closing the case so the grand exhibition could proceed that night. The chief wanted to protest, but the mayor personally intervened. He said, "My current position owes much to the museum's support. My advice, stay out of this. This way, it benefits you, me, and the museum alike." Faced with undeniable authority, the chief had no choice but to compromise to ensure safety. He ordered only the exhibition area be opened and added extra personnel for surveillance. Meanwhile, on Margot's side, a giant beetle crawled out of the leaf box. It appeared to have hatched from the egg. Apparently, it had developed from the insect egg. Without hesitation, Margot grabbed a thick book and smashed the beetle through genetic testing. She was shocked to find the beetle's DNA closely resembled a Turkish lizard, strikingly similar even if the insect mutated after feeding on the leaves. This level of mutation was beyond imagination. What's more, Margot discovered, it could actually secrete human hormones. Just 1 milligram produced was over 100 times more than the thalamus. So how exactly did the leaf hormones kill? Although the connection is still unclear, Margot had a hunch that the murders were likely linked to the leaves. That evening, the grand banquet went on as scheduled, besides the mayor and his wife. Other social elites also arrived one by one. If nothing happened, the museum would rake in a fortune from donations during the gala. Otherwise, if the monster attacked, the consequences would be unimaginable. At that time, aside from the banquet hall, all other museum passages were sealed off. The police didn't dare lower their guard. Several officers with police dogs patrolled the underground passages thoroughly. Soon, the dogs began barking wildly at something. As they neared the target, the 2 dogs grew extremely agitated and eventually broke free. But just seconds later came the dogs' tragic howls. When the officers rushed to check, it was too late. One police dog had been killed by the culprit, its body tossed out to find the other dog. One officer charged into the pitch-black tunnel despite the danger, realizing how serious things were. The captain ordered 2 subordinates to rush to the gala and evacuate the guests, while he stayed behind to find the officer who had run off alone. The police dog was unharmed, but the officer wasn't so lucky. He didn't even get a clear look at the monster, was instantly killed. The only witness was the dog, and it was clearly traumatized. It just lowered its head obediently, not barking, not even daring to glance at the creature. When the captain followed the noise, the scene before him made him tremble. The officer had been dismembered, his body parts scattered in pieces all over the floor. The only relief was that the dog had survived. Meanwhile, at the gala, the director was enthusiastically explaining the exhibits to the mayor. Among them was the mysterious Kafka statue, now proudly on display. Just then, police rushed in, telling everyone to evacuate immediately. There was no time to explain what had happened. As they spoke, blood began dripping from above onto the guests. Guests who had remained calm moments ago now completely lost it. Everyone began to flee in panic. In the chaos, stampedes began to occur. Even worse, the museum's power system had been destroyed. It completely shut down. The pitch-black surroundings only made the dangerous situation worse. Some people managed to escape, but as the fire doors closed, many others were trapped inside the museum. They could only wait for the power to return. Only when the power returns can the fire doors reopen. The inspector headed to the control room to check the situation. He saw the security guard sitting motionless at his desk, so he walked over, only to find the guard had already died. Just then, a terrifying roar echoed in his ears. The inspector finally realized their opponent this time was something far more dangerous than any serial killer. Not wanting to sit and wait for death, he encouraged everyone to leave with him through the underground passage, but the mayor refused. He firmly believed that rescue teams would arrive soon, left with no choice. The inspector went ahead to scout the way alone. Not long after, the inspector called the mayor and clearly pointed out an escape route. The mayor was finally persuaded, but a few timid individuals insisted on staying and waiting for help. As the passage was closing, Margot and the old professor failed to get out in time and were trapped in the lab. They still didn't know what was happening outside. Fortunately, soon after, the inspector reunited with them in the underground passage. However, the danger had already reached them. The monster was incredibly strong. Luckily, the iron door held up. Margot told the inspector this creature was likely a mutated version of some animal, though exactly what, they didn't yet know. But one thing was certain, its mutation came from eating the leaves. After hearing Margot's analysis, the professor exclaimed that this was a new milestone in natural evolution. At the same time, the legend was finally backed by facts. According to rumors, the Gasala tribe members would eat a certain leaf when threatened by enemies. The hormones secreted by the leaves could affect human DNA, eventually mutating those who consume them into terrifying monsters. For the monster to survive, it must continuously replenish hormones, which explains why the monster craves the thalamus and pituitary gland. Margot collected some of the creature's bodily fluids to analyze further back at the lab. Meanwhile, outside the museum, a large number of police cars, fire trucks, and ambulances arrived for rescue, but with the fire doors locked, it would take time to break in. Those who stayed in the main hall thought they would be safe, remaining in place, but instead were brutally slaughtered by the monster. This time, the monster's appearance was clearly seen. In front of it, pitiful humans had no power to fight back. Back to Margot's side. The testing process turned out to be more complex than expected. The monster's DNA did not match any animal in the database, not a single match. Instead, it showed 30% similarity to a certain human being, which means the creature, besides being reptilian in nature, also carries partial human genes. It also carries partial human genes. To find out whose genes those are, they'll need to wait a bit longer since they couldn't break through the main entrance. The police immediately sent in a special forces team. The team entered the hall through broken windows. Unexpectedly, the monster was already waiting in ambush there. This move was basically serving themselves up on a platter. Before one could even die completely, another one walked straight into the trap. A team member tried to escape, but it was too late. With a light bite, the teammate was instantly disoriented. Seeing things go south, Soldier panicked and frantically shouted for his teammates to pull him up. But how could the monster let go of prey already in its mouth? Just as Soldier was about to reach the edge, at the final moment, his expression froze. When they pulled him up, Soldier's lower half was already gone. Margot planned to use liquid nitrogen against the monster. Before executing the plan, they went to find the old professor, but they were a step too late. The monster had already targeted him, and he was completely, utterly dead. Now was not the time for grief. Margot turned sorrow into strength, vowing to kill the monster and avenge the professor as planned. They used the leaves as bait to lure the monster into the underground tunnel, then trap it inside. The plan was flawless, but they hadn't expected that the monster was so smart. It didn't fall for the trick at all. At the moment the plan failed, Margot and the inspector felt utterly helpless and drained. They tried to escape, but found the exit had already been blocked by the monster. To protect Margot, the inspector locked her inside the laboratory and stayed outside himself to deal with the monster alone. At that moment, the final genetic test results came out. The human DNA inside the monster belonged to none other than Margot's colleague, Johnny. Margot wanted to tell the inspector the results, but the monster suddenly smashed through the glass and charged in. Hearing the scream, the inspector was helpless. He pulled the trigger to shoot the door lock, but the lock was just too strong. While fleeing, Margot kept shutting doors behind her, but those barriers were nothing to the monster. As it got closer and closer, Margot had a sudden idea. She smashed all the chemical bottles from the shelf onto the ground. Then, using available materials, she created a weapon that could react with those chemicals. But just as she finished, the monster appeared right in front of her. Maybe it was because Margot was too beautiful, or maybe it was the power of being the protagonist. Whatever the case, the monster didn't strike immediately. Drooling, it stared at her chest with gluttonous eyes. Seeing this, Margot seized the opportunity, first pressing the elevator button behind her, then throwing the weapon she made onto the chemical-covered floor. Soon, the lab was engulfed in roaring flames. As expected, all carbon-based life forms are afraid of fire. Margot took the elevator down to the first floor, but the fire spread there quickly too. Even while burning like a fireball, the monster was relentless. It kept searching for her. At the last possible moment, Margot jumped into a nearby water tank. The monster tried to climb in too, but as soon as it lifted 1 foot, its body gave out and it exploded into ashes on the spot. At the end of the story, the fire door was finally cut open. Margot and the inspector were safely rescued. The film was released in '97, setting aside the plot and special effects. The strongest impression left by this movie can be summed up in one word: dark, a dazzling kind of dark. For monster-themed films, the plot often isn't the main focus. As long as the special effects and monster design stand out, it's still full of highlights. Maybe to save on budget, there were very few clear shots of the monster in the whole movie. You could count them on one hand. In fact, the total screen time for the monster was less than 5 minutes. The director came up with a clever workaround by showing shattered corpses to indirectly demonstrate how terrifying the monster was. But this kind of shock tactic clearly lacked soul. Alright then, that's the end of today's story. If you liked it, go check out the original film, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.